Good afternoon. It is Friday, May 14th. I'm Lena Muraski, and we're back with another exciting program in store for you. On this edition of The Pulse, Tony Machete brings us through the reopening process of the Manchester Parks and Rec summer camps, while Merry Keyt has a sit-down interview with the Superintendent of Manchester Public Schools to get info on plans for next year. We have all that and more on this week's program. Stay tuned because you're watching The Pulse. When most of us hear about service learning projects, we instantly think about the graduation requirement part of it, and not the good part that comes out of them. I took a deeper look into just how much joy and sense of community these projects can have. For my service learning project, I wrote positive notes to the nursing home to show my love for the elderly.
I'm helping my little brother with homework. He's in the 7th grade. He goes to Ely Middle School. So I'm just going to be helping them with homework.
I'm teaching children basketball skills and how to play knockout.
I made masks for my friends and my family.
For my service learning, I helped serve food to a food shelter in Manchester.
As the class of 2021 finishes up at Manchester High School, there are a few more projects to complete for this year. Law and Order teacher Mr. Jones expresses its importance.
Service learning is a graduation requirement here at Manchester High School, and the idea is that students design a project to give back to either the school or kind of community at large.
Not all students realize that service learning projects are a requirement for graduation. Manchester High junior Ben Cherry shares his thoughts.
As a junior, I had no idea I had to do a volunteer project in order to graduate. Now that I know, I can actually plan something meaningful to me, and it will help the community.
Many have wondered what goes into the service learning project and the end goal students are trying to accomplish.
Is that the Board of Education wants to ensure that kids are participating in an authentic experience where it's more than just volunteer work, but it's a process by which kids design a project. They research a problem, they propose a solution to that problem, and they try it, and then they kind of reflect on hey, was that effective or not?
It takes one person to make a difference, but the change can start with you.
The solution can start with me.
The solution can start with me.
The solution starts with me.
From Manchester, this has been Lena Muraski reporting. It was really great to see how impactful some of these projects are to the people in our community. Last year, COVID-19 shut down summer camps in Manchester, leaving both children and staff out of work and fun. Tony Machete gives us an inside look on how camps will adjust to the COVID environment this summer.
Last year, summer camps were shut down due to COVID. This year, they're coming back with many changes. They have to change locations of the summer camps this year.
So they're actually at our home base sites, which are the sites that the camp owns. So it's Mahoney, which is Washington School. We have one here at Center Springs, Nathan Hale, the Community Y, and then Camp Kennedy, which is near Martin.
Also, with the pandemic going on, lots of changes need to be made to keep campers and counselors safe.
We have so much that's different this year. We have to do the whole mask. We have to make sure everyone's masked, including the staff, parents, campers. We have to make sure that we're social distancing, which is something we've never had to do before.
The number of campers and counselors went down significantly this year.
So we used to have about 100 campers at each site, and this year we have 30. We also, it's a big change. We also used to have about 20 staff members at each site, including counselors, directors, and we have 5.
Summer camps include lots of physical activity, but will campers be allowed to remove their masks?
There will be certain times a day, probably 3 or 4 times a day, that they will have social distance mask breaks.
There are a lot of exciting options this summer for camps. You may find yourself right here at Center Springs Park. Make sure you sign up before it's too late. From The Pulse, this has been Tony Machete reporting.
Despite these changes, the camp staff will continue to provide a fun and safe environment for campers in the summer. Speaking of changes due to COVID, there are many questions as to what should be expected for next school year. Pulse Director Merry Keyt sat down in the studio with Superintendent of the schools, Matthew Gary, to gain some insight on the situation.
Hello, my name is Meredith Keyt, and I'm Student Director for the Pulse program. We're pleased to be joined by Superintendent of Schools, Mr. Matthew Gary. Mr. Gary, welcome to the Pulse.
Thank you, glad to be here.
We've got a few questions for you today, if you don't mind, just regarding the school year. So first, what would you say the biggest challenge was this year, given how unique the year was?
There were a lot of challenges this year for sure. I think the biggest one is probably trying to meet the needs of everyone because I think people's needs were so different based on personal situations or medical situations or the continually changing information about COVID. So I think trying to reopen schools in a way that's safe and meet any kind of childcare needs. You just had people with vastly different needs. A lot of times the needs were in complete conflict with the other person's needs, and we're trying to run sort of one school system with a lot of ever-changing information. So I know a lot more about quarantines and vaccines and medical stuff and social distancing than I would have ever thought. But I think trying to keep people calm and informed and feeling safe in a time when there was a lot of uncertainty, to me is among the biggest challenges of the year.
What have you learned most about the Manchester public school system throughout this year and everything going on?
Yeah, so I think a lot of learning. The first lesson would be just the power that we can have when we come together. So I think you had students and families and teachers and staff doing just, heroic things to make sure that kids were fed and educated, and parents changing their work schedules to make sure kids are learning. And so I would say overall, obviously we haven't been perfect, but overall I think people have just done a ton of work to make sure that we could educate kids to the extent possible given the challenges. And I think that was a challenge for teachers, it was a challenge for families, it was a challenge for students. So I think just the sheer power of possibility when the community comes together. And then I think, to a lesser extent, we learned a lot about online learning and Google Classroom and sort of what might work and what didn't work, that I hope challenges us to rethink some elements of school going forward. So not to suggest that school, will be full remote all the time, but that in 2021, 2022, in terms of the way in which everyone, not just students, learns, there's a lot of different ways people can learn. And I think we've picked up some good strategies for that through this experience that has sort of forced us to think about learning differently. So I would say those are probably the two.
Yeah, so with that, what flowing into next year, what do you think an average day might look like for an MHS student next year?
Yeah, I think the average day in terms of, I suspect there'll still be masks. I think that those are probably here for another little while. I suspect we'll still have some kind of spacing guidelines where possible in classrooms. I suspect we'll still be trying to kind of one-way flow in the hallway, though maybe not quite as tight. And then I hope that, we've taken this opportunity to really think about how to make the student day more flexible. So if the normal 7:45 to 2:05 sort of works for you, there'll be, opportunities for that. But if there's other situations, you have a job, you have a sibling childcare need, you have, you're just overwhelmed with classes during the day, I hope that this will allow us to make a much more flexible schedule, create much more flexible schedule opportunities for students. So I think in large part the flow of the school, the feel of the school, it was like, I remember walking around here the first day of student return in August, and it really didn't even feel like a school. Yeah. And then walking around again the first day kids were back, and it started to feel a little more schoolish. So I feel like in the fall we're going to make every effort to make it feel like everyone is back. But I also think there's a place for flexibility, and if you're a student and you've got other stuff going on, or you're in 5 AP classes and you want to have a way to not have to do everything between 7:30 and 2:30, or you have an outside interest that you pursue after school. I want those learning experiences to be able to count for things. So I hope that's our plan, is to think through how do we create as much flexibility as possible while still holding people to high standards. But if you think about like the workforce today, the way in which we ask most businesses or companies, they're hiring people knowing that what they hire you for is probably not what you're going to be doing in 5 years, because the need is going to change. And so we want to promote learning in all different facets that support what kids need.
Yeah, awesome. So again, going to next year, what is one thing you would want all MPS students to know starting the year?
I think what I would want everybody to know is that we understand this year has been an extremely trying experience for everyone, for a multitude of reasons, both related to COVID and all of the racial injustice. I think we understand that students, families, staff have all been impacted in some way, shape, or form by the last year, and that it's impossible to think about next year without acknowledging that.
Yeah.
And that will, for us, it means that when we return, there has to be a heavy emphasis on just community building and student support and staff support, not at the expense of the curriculum, but one of the things that's, I think, gone well during this year is that people were very mindful about those experiences that others were having. And I think we want to continue to be mindful next year that we're all human. It might not be a pandemic, but there's things happening in everyone's lives, and that if we were all a little more mindful about that, we want to create strong school communities. And because I think we saw that this year in terms of the effort that people made to connect and support friends, family members, teachers, staff. So I would say our top goal is to make sure that we recognize, acknowledge, appreciate, and understand the experience everyone has had this year, adults and students, and that we're going to respect that experience next year and know that we have to just create a space that supports all that occurred.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That wraps up the questions we have. Thank you for joining us in the studio today. We know it could not have been easy to be a superintendent through everything going on, so we appreciate all you have done for our school system. And that wraps up our interview.
Thank you very much.
Manchester Public Schools are in good hands for the future with Mr. Geary at the helm. Well, that's all we have for you this week, Manchester. If you have any story ideas we might have missed, you can email Mr. Larson at b11elars@mpspride.org. And please don't forget to follow us on social media. You can check out our past work by heading to mhstelevision.com. I'm Lena Muraski, and this has been The Pulse.